Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. I'm joined right now by the general manager with Manitoba Pork. It is Cam Dahl. Cam, great to chat with you again.
Good to see you, Sean.
Okay, you wrote a blog post that I found very fascinating and interesting. We're always looking at potential trade issues that could really impact Canadian producers. In this case, of course, it has to do with the pork industry. Cam, why are you concerned about the thickening border between Canada and the United States because of Product of USA labeling changes and Proposition 12? What's going on?
Yeah, so the U.S. market is our number one market, and across the country we export about 70% of the pigs we raise, either as pork or as live animals. In Manitoba, that number's even higher. We export 90%. And the U.S. is our most important market. So every time there's something that slows or makes that border a little bit more difficult to cross, we make a little bit less money. And it is a real significant issue. And these two issues, I don't think they started off as trade issues. I don't think that was the intent, but that's what they're becoming. And just to start off with Proposition 12, I guess, for your listeners that don't know, it's a requirement in California for very specific space requirements for raising animals, including pigs. And unlike other legislation that's like this in the past, California is requiring all the pork sold in the state to meet these requirements. So that means that their legislation is reaching beyond the borders of California and into Canada. And so if we're going to have to sell young weanling pigs to be raised in Iowa, well, if they're going into the California market, we have to comply with that California law. And it's just one state, and there could be 50 more pieces of legislation like that, and really creating a fragmented market.
Yeah, that the fragmentation, that hodgepodge is really kind of it feels like it's kind of snowballing here. It was at one point we were really focused, of course, because California is a very large consumer market, absolutely. But we're starting to see other states come up with not necessarily an exact replica of Proposition 12, sort of their own version thereof. There are some differences, and all of a sudden now the Canadian pork industry is in this example is not just dealing with the United States, it's dealing with a whole bunch of individual states with their own production or selling requirements, which is really going to create some friction when it comes to the trade front. How do you enforce all this?
I don't know. I don't know how they intend to. And you're right. If I'm just going to pick on Massachusetts because I know they're going to follow quickly with legislation, and it's exactly that. And it's not the same as California. So if you're a Canadian producer and if you're a commercial producer, you've probably spent a few $1 million to upgrade your barns to comply with the Canadian Code of Practice, group housing. But if that doesn't comply with California, then you'll have to spend a few $1 million more to comply with California. And that's just California. What about Massachusetts and all the other states? Those goalposts, not only do they continue to move, they just don't exist anymore. You don't know where the end of the field is. And you don't function that way in a regular market where the rules are changing like that all the time.
When you use the example of Iowa, there are U.S. states that are fairly, I don't know if they're reliant, but the Canadian market is pretty important to them. We ship a lot of young piglets to the U.S. that are part of that supply chain, which is very, very integrated. So this is a real concern for some of those states that are doing the finishing.
Absolutely, it is. And Manitoba alone ships about 3 million pigs. Most of those go into Iowa and Minnesota, mostly into Iowa. And so, yeah, that's absolutely right. What's going to happen? Again, we have really good relationships with our customers in Iowa, but their suppliers are saying, you have to comply with these new regulations out of California or the Product of USA labeling. We chat about that a little bit too. it doesn't matter how good your relationships are. They're going to say, we don't want your pigs.
Now,
Um,
Cam, how should in your opinion, as the head of Manitoba Pork, how do you feel Canada should be responding to this? Is there an assertive way to go about this to make sure that our concerns are heard on the trade front?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what is going to be the right alternative, or the right option, but we should be far more assertive than we have been, because not only do I think that this is going to extend to other states on, this space requirements, uh, but what else is going to be put on a ballot somewhere? Is it going to be water requirements? Is it going to be particular carbon requirements? What else is going to be put on a ballot that all of a sudden we're going to have to comply with? That's not written into trade agreements, not based on science. Um, where is this going to end? It really is a Pandora's box. So whether it's the go together with Mexico and challenge under the CUSMA, or whether there's a WTO route, we should really be exploring options. We shouldn't be letting this pass lying down.
Now, we've been kind of focused here on Proposition 12, but there also is a concern about the Product of USA label changes. Now, I'm very familiar with this on the beef side.
Yeah.
What is the pork industry's concern when it comes to the Product of USA label changes?
Well, again, we're talking about this integrated North American market, or integrated Canada-US market. And that really is beneficial to everybody involved. It's beneficial to Canadian producers, it's beneficial to American producers, and it's beneficial to consumers as well. And right now, if you buy ham in the US and it's been processed at a US packing plant, but that pig happened to be born in Canada, that can still carry the Product of the USA label. And that is in recognition that our standards are equitable, maybe not 100% the same, but we have the same food standards, we have the same animal welfare standards. And that is just simply a recognition of that fact. What the administration is proposing is to change that so that the requirement will be born, raised, processed, and packaged in the US. So again, those Canadian weanlings going down to Iowa, if Costco comes back and says, so if you go into the store, all their pork products are labeled Product of the US, even in Canada.
Yeah.
And if they go back to their suppliers and say, we're not changing our marketing, we're not changing our labels, you comply. So what happens to the value of those 3 million weanlings that are going into Iowa and Minnesota every year? They're discounted.
So Cam, this is exactly what you want to sort of parallel this back to Proposition 12. This, you mentioned Costco as a major retailer. There's others, Walmart and of course others. This is my concern with Proposition 12, is how those major retailers react to having to deal with a large state like California, what their requirements are. And then basically some of the neighboring states in the western half of the US don't even have to have those kind of regulations.
Exactly.
But the grocer is going to say, you know what, we're not running parallel systems here.
Exactly. We're not segregating between Washington State and California. You can it's all the same. And it's California compliant.
Okay, so is any of this, so I think sometimes we think that we are leading the charge in Canada when it comes to some of this stuff with, sort of head scratchers, right? In this case, it's the US and Canada is sort of looking down and saying, what is going on here? Is there movement afoot in Canada for these kind of strict sort of regulations?
We there might be some of my members that disagree with this, but we have a pretty good system when it comes to our good approach through the National Farm Animal Care Council, and developing the codes of practices for the care and handling of all animals. All farmed animals have a code of practice, and it really does come down to there's actually some science behind what's in that code. There's NGOs around the table, there's farmers around the table, there's vets around the table. that we don't see as much of this fragmentation or, arbitrary, because what's in California's property, it's arbitrary. And so we really do have we've evolved a much better approach here in Canada.
Yeah. Okay. And because there was talk last week in the U.S., I was hearing some American trade officials talk about how Canada has Proposition 12 like requirements. Is that not? That's kind of a general statement, not necessarily totally accurate.
Well, I'm not sure of where those are, especially when it comes to requirements for selling in the store, at your grocery store. I'm not aware of any requirements like that.
And the big question that keeps on getting asked is the auditing of some of these requirements. So let's just say somebody in Manitoba who is shipping piglets to Iowa. Who's auditing that? Is the California Agriculture Department coming north to do on-farm audits?
I wish them well if they want to come onto farms in Manitoba or anywhere else. That's not just something that it's not going to be acceptable. So no, California FDA agents aren't coming onto farms in Manitoba.
Yeah, I want to video all that. If that,
yeah, exactly. But what might happen, Sean, and again, we're talking about the power of some of these big retailers, whether it's Walmart or Kroger or Costco. They may require that audit, right, of their suppliers. And it doesn't necessarily have to be California officials or
right.
That comes back to the power of those large retailers.
So at a time where all we're talking about is food prices and food inflation, and this is a major concern for Americans and Canadians, here we are, what one would maybe call stubbing our toe and self-inflicting a wound. And isn't the impact here just higher food prices to try to meet all these increased requirements?
And I would add reduced choice. So those are the two impacts: higher food prices and reduced choice. The segregation always costs money, right? And that's what both of these are putting into place. Both the labeling and Proposition 12. It's going to cause increased segregation, and it's going to cause discounted Canadian discounts on Canadian pork and Canadian pigs, and of course beef in the case of the labeling. And consumers in the U.S. are going to pay more.
So the initial thrust here, Cam, on Product of the USA label changes was to prevent certain practices, reboxing,
right.
Finished, boxed beef coming out of South America somewhere. The original intent was not to prevent 3 million piglets from coming into Iowa that are essentially just not born. They're born in Canada, and at the age of how old?
Oh, they're like 7 kilograms or something like that. They're pretty small when they go across the border.
They're just little piggies. They're like the 3 little piggies that went to market.
Exactly.
Get on a truck and they go to the US. They are raised and finished and slaughtered and packaged and boxed in the US. They would not be called Product of the USA. That seems like a bit of a head scratcher.
It is a huge head scratcher. Again, especially getting back to our standards are the same, right? Are equivalent. We have equivalent standards. So yeah, hopefully there's still time to change some of this.
Cam, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Always good to chat, Sean.